Hello, Packers fans. It's that time of the year where we have grades and analysis putting a ribbon on the 2024 season for the Green Bay Packers. I'm Dominique Yates. I'm joined by Packers News beat writer Ryan Wood. Ryan, you finally hit the end of the grades, the series. I'll admit, I've been on off season. I've been relaxing, been resting, getting furniture for my apartment. Exploring Green Bay, you have been working from sun up to sundown. But just, take me through just now that it's completed, how was it? How was the experience for you?
I love that it's over. No, I do it every year. And the reason I truly do enjoy doing it as much as it's work, and it's a lot of work. You learn so much. I learned so much doing it. And we're talking, we're at every game. We see every play. There's nobody that follows this team closer than we do. But there's a reason why coaches, Matt LaFleur, how many times does Matt LaFleur say immediately after a game when he's asked a question, I don't know, I got to see it on film. You got to see it on film. And when you see it on film, and especially for me, I take it all after the season. I truncate it down. I watch it all at the same time. And for me, it really helps me to see the totality of the season at a very fine-tooth combed type level. And I learned so much. So I hope that readers get the same type of information and just learning that I do. That's what I enjoy the most about this project.
Yeah, like I said, these are my notes. I got plenty of notes here that we can run through everything. And
hey, my notes is a 68-page Word document. My process. This is my process. Every play of every game, every player, I have a line based on what they did, right? And every line starts with the player's number. Makes it easy to go through a 68-page, 20,000-word page document and find a specific thing. There are lots of notes.
Yes. And like I said, I told you before we got on, I mean, again, I enjoyed it myself because, like you said, it's one thing to see it from the naked eye, but then to really go back. And it was cool to see some like, oh, yeah, I remember that play. And you almost forget like, oh, that was kind of a turning point play, or this moment, or, oh, that was a missed block that led to a Josh Jacobs tackle for loss. Just the list goes on and on. So it's good to go back and just read and digest everything. So, we got your grades, we got your analysis, we got your takeaways. So, let's go ahead and run through everything. And let's start with the offense. And obviously we can start into the quarterbacks. You looked at Jordan Love and Malik Willis. Obviously Jordan Love, he had a B-. Malik Willis had a C+. As far as with Jordan, there's like three takeaways that I had, and I got it not only from your analysis, but just, looking at everything. The things that stood out to me, especially not being here, comparing 2023 to 2024, the deep passes compared to the third down conversion. And then the other thing I looked at was just, you said those number of bad balls, what was underthrown, what was overthrown, just all of those things. And then the last point was the rushing yards, not so much because he didn't run the ball, because he was injured and he played less games. So obviously every stat is going to be down a little bit, right? But I guess my question was, obviously LaFleur, Love will never answer it. How hurt was he playing through this season? But for me, just, what were your takeaways and just overall impressions when you looked at the quarterback play?
Reverse option splits from 2023. Really good on third down, fourth down, 2023. I mean, lights out. And it started 2023 opener in Chicago where he's lights out against the Bears on third down. And it just was that way throughout the entire first season as starter. Not the same guy on third down this past season. I mean, you're going to have that. You're not always, you're going to have fluctuations. And this is still a small sample size for Jordan Love because we're talking about 2 seasons. But he took a step back on third down, and that's critically important. You talk about why I believe QB wins as a stat. It's because the ball's in their hand on third down, the money down. It's their decision-making. It's their play-making that decides games, and it comes from the third down. So that's got to get better. But you saw Jordan Love last year with a lot of the decision-making elements of the job. He looked like a young quarterback. Take nothing away from the injury. That was part of it too. He looked like a young quarterback still learning in this league. There's so many things that I don't care how long you're behind Aaron Rodgers in practice. You can't learn from practice. 3 years, you have to actually play the game to learn the minutia of the position, which is critically important. I think you saw him still kind of swim through that. But physically, there's no shortage of physical talent here. This is an incredibly gifted quarterback, makes every single throw. And I know I crunched all 461, including the 2-point conversions this year. He can make every single throw. And the big question on him coming out of his first full season was the deep ball. Can he be prolific and efficient throwing deep down the field? Absolutely he can, because he was in 2024. It started with that 70-yard touchdown to Jaden Reed in Brazil against the Eagles, running out of the pocket, putting it on a dot down the field, wide open Jaden Reed, but put it on a dot. You saw that over and over again. I understand the season didn't end with them stretching the field. Obviously, Christian Watson's injury had a lot to do with that. But this is a quarterback that can make every throw. And yes, he has a very good deep ball. That's a good place to start from as he's going into his third season. He's got every physical talent that you could possibly hope for in a quarterback. You mentioned the bad balls. This offseason, early in this offseason, you get a sense that it's almost kind of a pick a side when it comes to the inefficiency of the passing game. Was it the quarterback? Was it the receivers? The true answer to that is yes. It was both. Jordan Love had the injuries took a toll. Matt LaFleur mentioned this after the end of the season, where his lack of practice time because of the injuries developed some bad habits. There were some guys that he would miss in the progression, and there was a lot of off-platform throws, which he can make, but you want a guy with a big arm like that to step into the throw, nice, solid, sturdy base, and let it rip. Was not happening late in the season. He needs to be more accurate. The receivers need to catch the ball too. I mean, that was a major problem. So you can't say it was just one or the other. It was both. But yeah, Jordan Love, the inaccuracy needs to improve.
That really stood out to me. You said of those 461 throws, including the 2-point conversions, 43 were bad balls. And I guess you can kind of transition to that when you're all talking about the receivers, because like you said, it's a little bit of both. One last point, though, on Love. With those overthrows, the underthrows, the wide throws, when you looked at the film, was there all defenses are different. Sometimes maybe it was a pressure or different things, but were there some similar trends that you saw from Love with his, was it throwing mechanics? But I guess, what did you see from some of those throws? Was it kind of a similar trend when some of those completions weren't there?
Footwork. Yeah, it was a similar trend. Most of the time, it was the footwork. And Matt LaFleur, that's the one thing he said after the season. He's got to be better with his footwork. You watch the film, he absolutely does. If he can be, I mean, that's got to be, when he works with Steve Calhoun, his quarterback's coach, personal quarterback's coach this offseason, that's got to be the focus, right? And if he can get that nailed down in his game, then you have a mechanically sound, strong arm quarterback, makes all the throws. That's a scary possibility. You just got to see it happen more consistently.
Yeah. So now let's just kind of jump into sticking with the passing game, because you did mention the wide receivers. Only one guy, Jaden Reed, graded a B or higher. Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks were C's. Bo Melton was a D, as well as Malik Heath. This was such an interesting position for me. I probably spent the most time reading the receivers because of all the numbers in there. And I'm almost not sure where to start. But when you saw the 41 drops, I guess to see that in writing really resonated with me, because Wicks had 12, Dobbs had 11, Reed had 10. And when we're talking so much about that wide receiver one or a guy stepping up and elevating, sometimes I'm thinking, do you need to go get one? Probably. But maybe that guy was right here, because Reed had 903 yards with 10 drops. You get rid of some of those drops, maybe he is a 1,000-yard receiver. How many drops did Wicks have in the end zone? Maybe he led the team in touchdowns with 8 because Kraft had 7. So there's so many little things where there's guys here, and at least after seeing the numbers, I could understood why Gutekunst and LaFleur were trying to say, we don't want just one guy, we want more, but they still have to produce. What were your takeaways?
Yeah, Dontavian Wicks dropped 2 touchdowns week 4 alone against the Vikings. The hands have got to get better, and drops are subjective. If you have 10 people tracking drops, you will get most likely 10 different numbers. The way I do it, these are professional receivers. I tend to be a strict grader, but they're professional receivers. If the football hits their hand and it is not knocked out, that is a drop. And I think that that's how, at the end of the day, professional receivers are going to view a drop too. I mean, you hear it all the time. Ball hit my hands, got to catch it. They're absolutely right because they're paid to catch the ball first and foremost. So 41 drops. Of those, 7 were also bad throws because there's sometimes some overlap. You know, it's an off-target pass, but it did hit their hands, off target, and a drop. 34 accurate drops. Let's just put that into context, okay? Because every quarterback in the league has accurate drops. That's part of playing the game. But 34, just half of those, that's a conservative number. 17 are caught. Should be even higher. It should be more than 17. But 17 of those 34 accurate drops are caught. You're talking about a quarterback with a 63.1% passer rating, tied for 28th with Will Levis in the league, all of a sudden 11th in the league at 67%, one spot behind number 10, Patrick Mahomes. That's how significant the drops alone were to the efficiency of this passing game. And I don't care how inexperienced you are. I don't care how young you are. Every receiver in this league at this level is paid to catch the ball. So that's priority number one, is shoring up the hands.
Yeah. So as far as you can say, obviously we're going to talk defense. So with the pass rush and the receivers, are they 1A, 1B, 1 and 2? Is there a higher, you can say point for you in terms of you think priority? Did the film change anything from you when you looked at the receivers?
They both have to get addressed. They need a number one receiver. And I know that that's a fantasy football term, so let me put it more into reality for you. They need a go-to matchup that they can reliably know will win their matchup every single time they need it. And you look at the other offenses, other quarterbacks around the league that make the playoffs. Patrick Mahomes, okay, he doesn't have a number one receiver. He's got Travis Kelce. That's a number one receiver. Look at Jalen Hurts. A.J. Brown, okay, he's got Saquon Barkley, and that's the identity of their offense. But he can go to A.J. Brown whenever he wants. On down the line, Jaden Daniels has Terry McLaurin. Yeah. The Packers don't have that guy. Brian Gutekunst when you got a young quarterback that's really, really talented, loaded with potential, but is still developing and still trying to search to maximize and reach that potential, you have to continue pouring every single asset you can into that guy's development. And what that means for this team is adding a number one receiver. Now, if you ask me to choose which one is more important, I think the defensive line as a whole, but specifically the lack of elite edge rushing talent, is the biggest need on this roster. We'll get to that later. I know it's a good offseason to need elite pass rushers. That to me, pass rushers win games. That to me is the number one need. But we're talking 1A, 1B. They need to go find that guy receiver as well. That's not something where this team can afford to pick and choose between those two.
It's going to be interesting how they handle the receiver situation. And I do imagine without Christian Watson and maybe even Romeo Doubs, obviously we're not sure with everything with his concussions. It's going to be interesting what route they go, whether if it's going to be trying to find a vet or just maybe a really star. Obviously, I'm not really sure how many star receivers are out there in the college football landscape right now, but it seems like a vet might be the best route to go. Not only that, but I'm fascinated with those numbers because when we're talking about receivers, again, I got a lot of numbers here. You talked about 4 pass catchers with at least 74 targets, no more than 82. Wicks was number one on the list with 82 targets. In comparison, Amon-Ra St. Brown had 151 targets, 123 receptions, 1,400 yards, 12 touchdowns. And that's the epitome of reliable guy.
Brian Gutekunst talked after the season. I asked him this specifically, and he said that historically teams that are really lopsided in their target distribution don't fare well in the playoffs. He didn't say he was thinking about 12 to 17, but that sounds like Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, right? Amon-Ra St. Brown, the Lions didn't go anywhere this postseason. So there's some truth to that. And I think it's easy and it's right to be hard on this receiving group. Josh Jacobs said at the Super Bowl they need that number one, right? So it's not just pundits. It's not just the outside. Like internally, they see the same thing. It's easy to be hard. It's not all bad there, though. Like this is still a very deep group. It's just when they don't have that top of the depth chart guy, everyone's playing a lineup on that depth chart in terms of roles. And I think that you see, especially for this young group, some guys that are in position sometimes that they can't always produce the way that a guy who should be in that position can produce and is expected to produce. There's depth here. And so it's by far, it's absolutely not there's much more depth than edge rusher. It's absolutely not a start from scratch. Let's just scrap the whole thing and start all over. No, you need that one guy. And then I think that your depth, which will get tested next season because of the injuries you just mentioned, but until in the late season, the depth was really shined for this receiver group. You can have a suspension to Romeo Doubs week 5, go on the road, still produce, win a game against the Rams. You can get away with some of these injuries if a guy's not in the lineup because they have so many guys that produce. They do need that one guy, and that doesn't mean you only throw to him. You don't give him the Devontae Adams treatment necessarily, but you have the depth around him to really be soaring as an offense.
As you stick with the passing game, one guy who you said not only needs more targets, but needs to be more of the guy for this passing offense is Tucker Kraft. Thoughts on just the year he had, and I was at 2-part. What's next for Luke Musgrave as they're trying to build some depth in the tight end room?
So yes, take everything I just said and scrap that because they have a number one target. His name is Tucker Kraft. The problem is they don't, and it's a good problem to have. They don't throw the ball to Tucker Kraft near enough. They especially don't throw the ball down the field to Tucker Kraft near enough. When you look at the production, 10 yards plus past the line of scrimmage, he's 75 targets. He had 10 targets, 10 plus yards past the line of scrimmage. He caught 8 for 260 and 3 touchdowns. Perfect passer rating. Why don't they do that more? Well, because Tucker Kraft is a classic inline tight end. His blocking is foundational to an offense, which, hey, by the way, the identity was inside zone power running game with Josh Jacobs. Having Tucker Kraft was a big part of that identity. Having that classic inline tight end, it's hard to get that guy away from the line of scrimmage. I totally get that. That is legitimately challenging. But it is, to me, the number one focus that this coaching staff on the offensive side has to figure out this offseason is how to unlock Tucker Kraft more in the passing game as a playmaker, which he absolutely is, without sacrificing the blocking that is foundational to the identity of this offense. That's why those guys the coaches get paid big bucks, right? I don't know how to do that, but that's what needs to be done. As far as Luke Musgrave goes, I thought he showed a little something. That was a heck of a catch he made against the Bears, that 19-yarder, made a play on the ball, scooped it, good hands, catching it off the ground. That's what he's supposed to do. I mean, that rare speed is why he's drafted in the second round, stretch the seam. He showed he can do that. With that said, the injuries are alarmingly concerning at this point. He's missed so much time in his first 2 years. First and foremost, he has to stay healthy, but then there's some development that he's going to have to catch up on. It is a critical offseason for Luke Musgrave. If he can ever just stay healthy and let his talent shine and play up to that talent, you're looking at a really good two-man punch at that position. That is a position the Packers haven't really been able to stock over the past decade plus, really since Jermichael Finley's injury in 2013. So there's a lot of promise there. Tucker Kraft, he is ascending toward being a top 5 tight end in this league. But Luke Musgrave, that's a big X factor.
And that's why you gave Tucker Kraft a B+, and Luke Musgrave is an incomplete. Like you said, you just have to see more there. A guy you don't have to see much more of, he is the MVP of the offense, Josh Jacobs. A historical season for the Packers. What a debut that he had, just accomplished so much. And the stat that I can't help but look at is the fact that he had 319 carries. He broke 97 tackles.
Yep.
Maybe even more. Like you said, these are different things, but
with
I don't
25
know.
Missed. Yeah, with 25
missed. I don't even know the number, but it's like it might be like every 3 carries, he's breaking a tackle and he's making something happen. And like you said, even watching it live, we would say like, man, this guy's getting met at the line of scrimmage, but he still turns it into a 2-yard gain, a 3-yard gain, or he'll show a little bit of that burst in speed or make a guy miss. Even in the passing game, just, when you went back and watched the film on him, just what were your takeaways? But he did get an A-, but also, he fumbled a little bit more than he has in previous seasons. Just, was there anything that stood out when you saw Jacobs' film?
Yeah, first of all, the broken tackles, another subjective tracking stat, right? If you get 10 people that know the game well, watch every carry that Josh Jacobs had last season, you'll get 10 different numbers for broken tackles. My definition is there contact that your average running back, it could bring down. A lot of that with Josh Jacobs this season was arm tackles. Not all broken tackles are the same. You got arm tackles. You got it. Sometimes Josh Jacobs would with Honey Badger, with Tyrann Mathieu down the sideline, stiff arm, right, and just run over him. Sometimes you shed a guy off your back, which he did multiple times on touchdowns close to the goal line. Not all broken tackles are the same, but 97 broken tackles, a lot of that arm tackles, and a lot of that because Josh Jacobs is a very different runner than Aaron Jones. You look at Aaron Jones, his broken tackles are way down, but he doesn't need to break tackles. He's got the lightning burst. He can hit a hole and get through before you even know he's gone. Josh Jacobs does not have that burst. He just runs through everything. And Josh Jacobs would talk about it during the season, how he felt like that really throttled up the offense. It really sparked the sideline. It got everyone juiced and amped. That's his game, is breaking tackles. So, yeah, that brought the power element. Only 7 runs of maybe 8 if you count the playoffs of 20-plus. He's not Saquon Barkley, not that anyone else is. He's not Aaron Jones with the big play ability. He's a guy that he'll grind you down with the power run. The fumbles, career high 5 if you count the playoffs, especially late in the season, it became an issue. The first 2 games he had fumbles in both. Then he had a large gap where he only took care of the football. And at the end of the season, that fumble bug kind of returned. So I think if you ask Josh Jacobs, he'll absolutely tell you that he needs to take better care of the ball. He's never been known as a high-volume fumbler before. That's something that if you look at one thing that he needs to be better at next season, it is that.
We've talked about this with the running backs. The RB1 position, there is no question, but it's going to be very intense and heated and fun to look at the second running back on that list because Emmanuel Wilson made some great strides this season. His carries went up 106, 508 yards, 4 touchdowns. Even had a nice screen pass, I remember, against the Titans for a touchdown. Like, he did some good things. He got a C+. But the guy that Packers fans would tweet at me the most and ask about was Marshawn Lloyd. That's a guy that they really want to see. He had the worst luck when it comes to injuries, and it's like, okay, you're finally going to get back, and it's appendicitis. Like, can the guy catch a break? I don't know. We need to take him to church or something and put holy oil on him because of all the bad luck that he's endured. I guess, what are you most looking forward to seeing when you look at that battle for, you could say, on the depth chart for the rest of the running back room?
Who wins? RB2, because Marshawn Lloyd was drafted in the 3rd round to be RB2. He was drafted to provide that lightning behind Josh Jacobs' thunder, and he might ultimately do that. But Emmanuel Wilson will not roll over easy. You could tell Emmanuel Wilson, who has more spark than Josh Jacobs, the biggest jump in his game last year was his physicality as a ball carrier. It was very evident that he spent a lot of time watching Josh Jacobs from the sideline in the film room, and some of that rubbed off. He didn't break a tackle in 2023. I don't know if you have the number, Don, but I think it was like 25 broken tackles that he had last season. A totally different playmaker, and he did it in the passing game too. That screen touchdown where he did show the burst week 3 in Tennessee. He was a complete playmaker from that position. Marshawn Lloyd has a lot of talent. I don't know what's going to happen there. It's going to be an absolutely fascinating offseason training camp battle to be Josh Jacobs' backup. This running back room as a whole, though, it's stunning how loaded it is. I mean, Chris Brooks, it doesn't even get mentioned. The job he did kind of being used as a hybrid fullback, his blocking was elemental to this offense a lot of times. When they went to the 2-back set, I mean, they kind of had a halfback that was playing in a fullback role and played it really well. Yeah. So you look at the depth chart, Josh Jacobs, a healthy Marshawn Lloyd, Emmanuel Wilson, who has emerged, Chris Brooks. There's a lot of talent and depth at that position.
Which is something that, I mean, if you do the what-if question, because I think about that regular season finale with the Bears, Josh Jacobs only had 6 carries. What would it have looked like if Marshawn Lloyd was healthy and he maybe got a bulk of those carries to go along with Emmanuel Wilson? So he's a guy for me. I'm wondering what it's going to look like to see him out there. He's got the body. He's got the look. You saw it at USC. You saw a little bit in the preseason before he got hurt. So I'm very, very interested to see what explosion he adds to running back room in an offense that's top 5 in the league already with, more than 1,000 yards rushing. So it's going to be fun. Do you have any other final takeaways on running backs before we jump into O-line?
No, that's it.
Okay. O-line, a consistent group. That's the best way to describe them, pretty much almost all across the board. The guys received Bs with Zach Tom, Elton Jenkins, Rasheed Walker, and Josh Myers. Myers, of course, had his best season of his career. Sean Ryan, he had a C, which, I mean, if you saw my college grades, you know why I would give him a thumbs up for that grade.
Hey,
right?
Let's just make this very clear. C, and I get this all the time every year. C is not a bad grade. F is a bad grade. Mm-hmm. C is not a bad grade. C means you're an average NFL player. That every team needs average NFL players. I didn't grade the Eagles this season. I don't know if this is true or not, but let's just say Oren Burks might have been a C given his season with the Eagles, right? You can't tell me that Oren Burks did not help the Eagles get to the Super Bowl. He absolutely contributed. C players are not bad players. They're average players that every team needs, and they can help you win. So Sean Ryan being a C as the lowest grade on this offensive line shows you how good this offensive line was, because that's not a weak link. It's the weakest link of the 5. That's not a weak link.
No. What I'm very curious to see and how they deal with the offensive line. Obviously, we've talked about, with Josh Myers' contract and the uncertainties. And right now, we're trying to figure out the depth, but then there's some injuries at depth. And then you saw what happened when Elton Jenkins went down at guard and they tried Glover and Telford. It was pretty much a disaster. So it's like, on paper, would you say okay, maybe you would want to run it back because Jordan Love was it was second in the league for fewest sacks and over, 1,000 rushing yards, but they took 1,000 snaps together. So it's like, okay, do you want to run it back and hope they stay healthy? But you also can't bank on that. And I think probably the Eagles game changed a little bit of the mindset of maybe how they would play that into the offseason. What are your feelings?
The best attribute this offensive line had was that, counting the playoffs, all 5 starters played 1,000 snaps. One of only 3 offensive lines in the league to do that. Buffalo and Baltimore, the other two other really good offensive lines. But you absolutely cannot expect that to be done in 2025. The last time all 5 Packers starters on the offensive line played at least 1,000 snaps was 2014. And I remember that season, my first season on the beat. That was an uncommonly healthy offensive line that year. And then it took a decade for that to happen again. So you're going to need the depth. You spent an entire season not really cultivating the depth because you didn't need to, because your 5 guys are on the field, best 5. They're not coming off. They're playing every snap. That's the position. That's life as an offensive lineman. You never leave the field. And then the biggest game of the year, after not cultivating that depth, Elton Jenkins has a stinger early in the game. He doesn't return. And you see they don't have any depth there. Well, they're probably almost assuredly not playing all 5 guys 1,000 snaps next year. They don't have much depth there right now. That's going to be – it's not edge rusher, it's not receiver, it's not interior defensive line. But that's going to be an offseason need, is to really build that depth. How do they do that? Well, there's a handful of critical decisions that Brian Gutekunst needs to make on this offensive line this offseason. None of them are more critical than what to do with Rasheed Walker, who has proven to be a starting caliber left tackle in the NFL at a position that, 1, wins games because that guy shuts down the quarterback's blind side. 2, because of that, they get paid a lot of money. Rasheed Walker is not a top 5 left tackle in the NFL. I don't know how they evaluate him going forward in terms of what his potential is. But right now, and projecting out, he is a starting caliber left tackle in the NFL who is in line for an extension this offseason. But do you make him prove it more after proving for 2 years that he's a starting caliber left tackle? Do you negotiate during the season? If he continues to play at this level, the closer Rasheed Walker gets to free agency, the more he's going to get paid. So that's the most critical decision Brian Gutekunst needs to make this offseason with this offensive line is Rasheed Walker at left tackle and what kind – do you extend him or not? Zach Tom is a no-brainer. He's getting an extension. He's getting a mega extension this offseason. It sure doesn't sound like he's ever going to move from right tackle. I get that the Packers thought he'd be a really good center when they drafted him. He played it in college at a high level. They might eventually move him to center, but if they move him to center at any point, he's going to be paid like a top right tackle because he's established that. I don't see him moving from right tackle. So the first decision that he's got to make this offseason is Josh Myers. Do you re-sign him? Do you run it back with this offensive line or not? Josh Myers had his best season. The biggest issue in his game when you watch the film over the past couple of years, he is a tall 6'5" center. It is difficult for tall centers to get leverage against these stouty, low to the ground, bulky defensive tackles to get underneath those guys. You'd see him get knocked back a lot off the snap in the past. He cut that way down last season. But when Josh Jacobs is a heck of a running back, broke a lot of tackles, but their inside zone game ran through the offensive line, and Josh Myers was at the center of that offensive line. He had a fairly significant part to do with that as well. The part of Josh Myers' game that's always been above average is his lateral quickness, his ability to be used as a pull center, pull blocking, his ability to get to the second level. He's a mobile guy for his size, especially his height, which you don't see with the last 6'5" guys. So he had his best season. Is he Creed Humphrey? Absolutely not. Not even close. Creed Humphrey's an all-pro. That will always mar the legacy here because they could have had Creed Humphrey. They took Josh Myers. But he is an absolute starting center in this league. He had his best year. Do they resign him or not? That's a great question. What might dictate the answer there is Jordan Morgan, who I gave an F because of the injuries, but also when he was on the field, you could tell it was not a natural transition from college tackle to guard. He struggled reading, diagnosing on the interior offensive line. He struggled in every element of the game. He looked like a guy who was making a transition to a position that he had not played. You look at the Kirby Joseph pick 6. Jordan Morgan got confused on that play. I mean, you watch it back. They had a kind of simulated A-gap blitz. Jordan Morgan jumps left to help the tackle, and it opens a big void for Alex Anzalone to rush up the middle. So for me, do they view Jordan Morgan as a guard that has to absolutely play? Do they compete him at tackle? If he's a guard, what do you do with Elton Jenkins and Sean Ryan? Because both those guys are ahead of him right now. Do you not bring Josh Myers back so that you open a spot for your first-round pick, or do you try to cultivate the depth? I think that's a big question that they've got to answer this offseason.
Definitely just so many layers to that. So it's going to be interesting how it plays out. So let's move on to defense. And this was a group for me that, again, it was fascinating to look at the numbers and even have a feeling for maybe what could be priority moving next season. Before we jump into that, this is the other thing as far just with the defense as a whole. Whenever you looked at start to finish, I think that in terms of how they built and developed rookies, how they filled holes when there were some empty spots, and how they, you can say, made some things that they were strong at really good, and they were able to navigate things that they weren't very good at. Of course, the pass rush. I think you have to be impressed with year one for Jeff Hafley, how he was able to kind of build this group and get them adjusted in many areas to a 4-3 and how they put it all together. Just what were your takeaways as a whole from just what the defense was able to do this season?
I was curious when I started watching the film on what was it that made this defense so good. They were a legitimate, bona fide top 10 defense, borderline top 5, which I haven't covered here in 11 seasons covering this team. What jumps out off the film is how much they swarmed the ball. Now, as soon as Jeff Hafley was hired a year ago, Matt LaFleur and Jeff Hafley talked about play style being more important than scheme, how you play defense, and specifically swarming the ball being more important. This defense swarmed the ball more than any Packers defense I've seen. It was stunning how many times you'd see multiple guys. They tackled really well too, but if they missed a tackle, another guy was right in the vicinity to clean up the play over and over and over again. These guys flew to the ball. I think Jeff Hafley had this defense playing with its hair on fire first and foremost. And then when you play that style, usually takeaways follow. It's a mindset. It's part of being aggressive, part of being fast and physical. And so I think those things were really linked. Obviously, the pass rush has to get better. If you look at one area why this team was not able to make a run to a Super Bowl this year, it starts with the pass rush. That Matt LaFleur, Brian Gutekunst have to hammer out how to get this pass rush playing at a much higher level, probably bringing in some reinforcements this offseason. But as a play style, this defense was very, very well orchestrated.
As far as when you talk about the pass rush and starting with the D tackles, that was such a unique group for me because even when I first got here watching training camp, I looked at that those D tackles like, man, they were dominant. They were flying around, not just against the Packers O-line, but I remember when the Ravens and they had the joint practice when they were in town. Like, those guys were able to get to Lamar Jackson. Like, they were able to do some really good things. And as you just mentioned, the Ravens had a very good, very consistent offensive line. But then the season rolls around and they just didn't get enough of that from the pass rush. But in terms of what they were strong at, which was stopping the run, 7th in defending the run. They only had 4 running backs that reached 100 yards. But what did impress me, too, was the fact that you said Kyler Murray didn't kill him with his legs. Jalen Hurts didn't kill him with his legs. Anthony Richardson didn't kill him with his legs. Even Will Levis, who likes to drop his shoulder and run, like, he was not a factor in the game as well. But the pressure stats really resonated. In 2023, 116.5 pressures. In 2024, 68. How much of that was guys like Wyatt and Slayton maybe weren't always as healthy, or just the guys on this current roster just can't, you could say, adjust to the 4-3? I guess, how do you kind of look at it?
Yeah, we'll find out specifically with Kenny Clark. You watch his film. He lost a few steps. He had almost no speed pressures, just a small handful of speed pressures. His total pressures went down significantly from 2023. Is that a defensive tackle who spent his entire career playing in a 3-4 and is now playing a 4-3 for the first time? Or is that still a young guy in age, but a guy who's got a ton of mileage because he was drafted young too, got a ton of mileage on his body at this level? That's an important distinction between the two, because once the mileage hits you don't find that fountain of youth. You don't suddenly get faster. It doesn't happen. That's not how Father Time works. But if this was a transitional year, and it wasn't always bad for Kenny Clark either. Like the idea that he was just terrible. He played 750 snaps on a borderline top 5 defense, 750 snaps on a top 8 run defense. He led that position, the interior defensive tackles, in snaps. If he was awful, it would be way more glaring with the overall defense and how they played. He was not awful, but he wasn't Kenny Clark either. And Kenny Clark's got a much higher standard for himself. I know it was a tough year for him. So where does he go from here, and how do the Packers evaluate where he goes from here is really going to determine how big of a need they see interior defensive tackle. I think it's a very significant need. Devontae Wyatt is emerging, but he's got to stay healthy. If not for the injuries, he would have been higher than a C+. He would have been more B- type range, maybe a B. TJ Slayton, I don't think there's enough attention being given, and kind of fittingly so, because he's an interior defensive lineman. In the 3-4, he's a nose tackle. We never talk about the nose tackle. That's not a position that we spend a lot of time talking about. But when you turn on the film, what did this defensive line do very, very well? Defend the run. This defensive line still did that at a high level. They didn't rush the passer near as well. They defended the run very, very well. TJ Slayton was the centerpiece of that run defense. You watch him as a 3-4 nose tackle in 2023. He was a beast. He was a man among boys. He was difficult to move. There's not a lot of 330-pound defensive tackles playing in a 4-3 in the NFL. I was very curious how that would transition. You turn on the film, he's still a beast. He's still a man among boys. He's a guy that's very, very difficult to move in the run game. He's going to be a free agent. I think that's a no-brainer that you bring him back. Because if that's the thing that you do really well at that position, you defend the run, you need to bring back the centerpiece of your run defense on the interior, and that's TJ Slayton. So that's a big decision for Brian Gutekunst to make this offseason.
Another guy on the D-line looking at the edge rusher. I guess one of the vets that early on received a lot of criticism, but he came on strong really late was Rashawn Gary, 43.5 total pressures, 8.5 sacks. He received a B-. He received the best grade out of anyone on the D-line. And then, some of the other guys, Kingsley Enagbari, Lucas Van Ness, Brenton Cox Jr., they all graded out as C's. Aaron Mosby was a D+. So you just mentioned earlier, obviously there needs to be an edge rusher, but at least I would say Rashawn Gary was a guy, at least on one end. I think he kind of proved that he could handle one side of that, you could say that line, but I think a strong side guy, whether it would be a Michael Parsons or a Max Crosby or Myles Garrett, I think it's pretty clear that that's a spot that needs to be filled because right now Enagbari, Van Ness, Cox Jr., there's just not enough consistency there from those guys. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, Rashawn Gary had the best run defense of his entire career in 2024. It's a big reason why coaches and players in this league voted him to the Pro Bowl. He set a hard edge. He rarely gave up contain. He wasn't flying upfield on the rush every single play. Much more physicality at the point of attack. It was a very good run defense season for Rashawn Gary. But you need more pass rush productivity, without a question. He is a good pass rusher. He has not been a great pass rusher sustainably in his career. He has rushed more like a number 2 on the depth chart pass rusher, on a good number 2, than a elite number 1. Will he ever get there? I don't know. But if you're just waiting around for that to happen, that's not being proactive, especially when Myles Garrett wants out of Cleveland, especially when Max Crosby might be available. I don't know that Brian Gutekunst can pull off those trades, but he absolutely needs to give a call to Cleveland, to Las Vegas, and figure out if he can, because those are game-changing acquisitions. From a GM whose final words this offseason, or this season, going into the offseason, was that there needs to be more urgency in pursuing a championship. Well, that's how you show urgency in that role. Hey, Cleveland, how much? Hey, Las Vegas, how much? Those are game changers potentially if you can pull off that move. But if you can't, there's still free agents out there you absolutely have to pursue aggressively. A Khalil Mack, a Montez Sweat. You got to scour every corner of this offseason trade market and free agent market, because that has you got to get reinforcements there. And the way I see it, I don't know that you can just afford to say, okay, we'll just draft and develop like always. It's an inexact science at a time that there's no luxury of patience to use an inexact science. Case in point, Lucas Van Ness, 13th overall pick 2 years ago, had a very good rookie season, had a very poor second season. I don't know what happened year 1 to year 2 with his pass rush other than the new scheme, but it was lacking. What's year 3 going to be like for this guy? It could be good. It could not be good. Do you really just want to leave it up to chance? I mean, you leave it up to, okay, let's try to develop this guy internally when you might be able to get better reinforcements outside? I don't see that.
I can't even lie. I was surprised Van Ness actually got a C-. Just because there was a lot of times in the moments I thought maybe he would have been like a D or something like that. I'm not a good grader or nothing like that. But again, there were some times where just seeing there were more than one game, it's just like, where is he?
Yeah.
Just
a lot of times on the sideline for Brenton Cox Jr., who had more snaps than him, and Brenton Cox Jr. would have had a higher grade if it hadn't been until week 11 that he started playing. He played better than Lucas Van Ness. Lucas Van Ness was on a C- means he was below average. Could it have been a D+? He wasn't terrible.
Right.
He just didn't make enough plays. There's a difference. If you're a D player on one side of the ball, the other, you're either a special teamer. If you're a D, you're usually a special teamer, or you're a guy that's really messed up a lot. And he didn't mess up a lot. There was a dearth of big playmaking.
Which is fascinating because you just mentioned the edge rusher, getting pressure on the quarterback and receiver are 2 high places on the priority. But the one that seems to have the most controversy in terms of what people think is number 1 is corners. And You've gone on record. I've gone on record. That is not number one. I've said more than many occasions. It doesn't matter what type of corner, what type of receiver you're facing up against. If there's no pressure on the quarterback, if Jalen Hurts or Tua Tagovailoa, you name it, has 6, 7, 8 seconds to throw the ball, he's going to get a guy open. And that's just the name of the game. So that lack of pass rush is what really hurt. But the corners, from what you saw and in these numbers, they did perform. Keyshawn Nixon was really good. He graded at the highest with the B-. Then Carrington Valentine, when he got healthy and they went with him more, he got a C+. And Stokes, he got a C-. Jair Alexander was a C-. And then some of the other guys. But the stats that you had for me before I let you take the floor, they only gave up 2 100-yard receivers.
Yeah. And one was really Johnny Smith. One was a tight end.
That's really good. Again,
none after week 1.
Yeah. 17 catches of at least 20 yards in 18 games. They did not give up explosive plays. It was 31-19 in 2023. You said it, that corners are not top priority. The numbers back it up. Ryan, take it away.
I don't know what else can be said other than those numbers. So you agree with me. You agree with me that corner is not a top priority.
Yeah, I agree.
So the folks that baffle me are those that think that corner is on par as a priority and a need with the pass rush. I just can't comprehend that. For one, I watched this season, and that's just not the case. The corners actually performed pretty well. The pass rush definitely did not. Mm-hmm. For two, which is more important? It's the pass rush. It's defensive front. The pass rush dictates the coverage. I'm not saying the coverage is not important. I'm not saying the quarterback's not important. It's a premium position, and those guys can win games too. When you have Jair Alexander healthy, he might be able to shut down half the field. Of course, he might also be giving up a 67-yard touchdown bomb to A.J. Brown in the opener as well, which happened. So, yeah, at their best, they can win games. Pass defense emanates from your pass rush, and it trickles down. So these are not the same, and they did not play the same either. So that stat you said, 17, 20-plus catches allowed, 20-yard-plus catches allowed, that was down from 31 the year before. The biggest thing that jumped out to me was the stark difference between a Joe Barry coached secondary and a Jeff Hafley coached secondary. Jeff Hafley sprinkled that magic DB dust on these corners, and he had them playing their best ball, which is probably not a coincidence that he is a lifelong DB's coach. That's what we wondered when he was hired. Well, can he fix Joe Barry's secondary? He did. This was a much better secondary. Now, they're going to need bodies. I mean, it's not like they can do nothing at quarterback this season, okay? No one's saying that. Brian Gutekunst, as he said, they need bodies, they need depth. But as a triumvirate of Keyshawn Nixon on the outside, where he was much better, much more natural than the slot, Carrington Valentine on the outside, who ended the season with grading 4 takeaway plays in the last 4 games, who finally, when he got that opportunity to start, played very, very well on the perimeter. And then you got Javon Bullard in the slot, where he naturally fits into this secondary and also is the strength of his game from his rookie year. That's pretty good. If you can fix the pass rush, that's good enough to win. If you can't, it's not. Either way, it's the pass rush.
Yep, and that is the best way to take it. Speaking of Bullard, and I will go ahead and talk about him as we kind of grouped him in with the safeties. He received a C because, he led the secondary in missed tackles. I would give him an A for effort. I couldn't imagine as a rookie going back and forth like that from safety to slot. You practice all week in the slot, then Evan Williams has a quad injury, and then 2-3 days before a game, you got to go to safety in the NFL. Like, he really went through the gauntlet, but I think, and your film kind of showed it, right? He was more comfortable, you could say, in that nickel position. And then when you had Williams and McKinney, who were terrific, that was kind of your base right there in terms of what your corners and your safeties, right?
What struck me about Javon Bullard was just how different his rookie season was from Edgerrin Cooper, right? Edgerrin Cooper flashes that potential early in the season. You see it there, but they are very cautious and very careful with how much he plays. There's mistakes there. They don't want to overextend him, overexpose him. He ends the season with 45% snaps, twice as defensive player of the week in the NFC. Doesn't even play half the snaps. Javon Bullard had the opposite treatment. And Jeff Hafley talked about trying to be cautious, trying to be careful with Javon Bullard, but ultimately he played a lot of snaps, played early, and he played all kinds of different positions. He played instead of focusing on one area, he was all over the place. It was very different than the Edgerrin Cooper treatment. And you saw more struggles from Javon Bullard, primarily because he wasn't protected from him as a rookie, right? He was on the field a lot more. You're going to see that a lot more. I think when you look at Javon Bullard, his play speed is dynamic. He's all over the field. He's got to tighten up on the efficiency, on the consistency. But the play of the year that he made was in that playoff game where he trucks Devonta Smith on a screen to Saquon Barkley from the slot position, and he tackles Saquon Barkley by himself behind the line of scrimmage for a tackle for loss. That's a grown man play right there. That for a rookie to do that, that shows you the type of potential that he's working with. When he was that deep safety, he struggled in coverage. There were some kind of Darnell Savage type vibes there, tracking the deep ball, knowing where to be on the back end. But the good thing is Evan Williams, right? Because as long as Evan Williams, Xavier McKinney on the field, you don't need Javon Bullard on the back end. Put him in the slot, let him play 800-plus snaps in year two. Evan Williams, other than the injuries, had a fine rookie season. I gave him a C+, would have been a B- at least, if not for the injuries. Xavier McKinney, the only solid A on this roster. I don't think anyone's shocked by that.
MVP.
Jeff Hafley described the perfect safety. Brian Gutekunst signed the perfect safety, and Xavier McKinney was the perfect safety.
Which is fascinating when you see again, I know it's social media, right? Fans and people can be delusional. But this whole notion that like Brian Gutekunst wouldn't be aggressive when he's trading and going after players, I just say look at the safety room. That sums it up in a nutshell. These were new guys who stepped up and made some good things happen. That sums up the name of the game for me.
There's a lot of residual memories from the Ted Thompson years when this team took a sideline approach to free agency. They weren't even in the backseat because they weren't even in the car when it came. They weren't in the vehicle when it came to free agency. I don't know how many times Brian Gutekunst's got to show you this is different now. When he's got cash, and oh, by the way, they've got cap space this year, around $45 million, and there's glaring weaknesses on this roster. He's not waiting around. He's going out and fixing them. He's signing Xavier McKinney as a top 5 paid safety in the league and fixing the safety position. I fully expect Brian Gutekunst to do the same thing with edge rusher this offseason.
Yep. Now, as we wrap up the defense and talk about the linebackers, you talked about Cooper. He was first in the team in tackles for loss. But then on the flip side, he was tied with Isaiah McDuffie for 15 missed tackles on 102 chances, which is still kind of fascinating. 3.5 sacks, 8 quarterback hits. He was graded a B. We are watching a guy that one day has a chance to be a superstar in this profession of the National Football League. And I think simply the next step for him, I think it's clear from the analysis and the numbers, clean up the missed tackles and continually work on where you're at during, you said, like the passing game.
And that was an issue across the board at linebacker. Often you didn't see him get any of the linebackers dropping deep enough in zone and carrying the deep middle field. Edgerrin Cooper will be a solid A soon. I have no doubt about that. That you can't coach that kind of speed. The big question for linebackers as a whole is Edgerrin Cooper your Mike next season? I think he's got to be because Quay Walker's not a Mike. And we said it a year ago, and we're still saying that. I understand the coaching staff has a lot of trust in Quay Walker's knowledge of the defense. It's why they stuck by him with the green dot. Quay Walker's not a bad player either, though. I think he's playing out of position. You put him in space. The reason Quay Walker's is not a Mike, his take on in the box, his crashing the line of scrimmage, it got a lot better late in the year, but it's still not consistent enough. His sideline to sideline, his lateral quickness, his pass rush, though, and Edgerrin Cooper can rush the passer too, but so can Quay Walker. You're not losing anything with Quay Walker being in more of a pass rush type role. Those are things that they portend very well to playing more in space. Last year, with Edgerrin Cooper as a rookie, they didn't have the luxury of moving Quay Walker from Mike because of his knowledge of the defense. Edgerrin Cooper, you would expect, knows the defense much better in year 2, needs to be the Mike, and he does need to trim down the missed tackles. He's got to learn how to harness that speed because you see him. You saw it in the Bears game, the regular season finale against Caleb Williams, overrunning a sack. You'll see him overrun a play a little sometimes just because he's a little too fast. But 13 tackles for loss. That's the most for an NFL rookie off-ball linebacker since Levante David in 2012. It's pretty good company.
Yeah. And then my last thing with the linebackers, I'm just curious and what's next for a lot of the guys? Isaiah McDuffie and Eric Wilson, who was able to do some good things at times. And I mean, Tyron Hopper, you saw just more from special teams than actual defense. I remember he had a good preseason, which kind of gave him that roster spot. But I'm just wondering what's the next step for those guys because you know what you're going to get with Cooper. You would think Quay Walker would at least be able to, if not maintain where he was at, maybe take another step and improve. But then for the rest of these guys, I'm curious, what that – you can say that depth at linebacker kind of shapes up with the rest of them and what's next with just them fitting in with this system and with this group with the Packers.
Isaiah McDuffie and Eric Wilson both going into free agency. Would not surprise me if both are back, but at least one needs to be back because they had good years as depth pieces. Yeah. I had to see for both. Again, that's not a bad grade. When your third and fourth linebacker are C's, that means they're average. That's good. Reminds me a lot of the running back position on the other side of the ball. You got that flashy player at the top of the depth chart, right? Edgerrin Cooper, Josh Jacobs. But then you've got so much depth behind them that doesn't really get talked about because of the top of the depth chart. That's the linebacker position. Tyron Hopper. Whether or not Eric Wilson and Isaiah McDuffie are both back this next season or not probably depends on what the Packers feel that Tyron Hopper is going to be in this league. We have no idea. He barely played. We don't know what he is or isn't. You would think that they have a good idea from a whole season's worth of seeing him up close in practice behind closed doors. So that's kind of an X factor as well. What will Tyron Hopper be?
Finally, special teams. Brandon McManus. He graded out as another A. He saved the Packers in more ways than one this season. Daniel Whelan was a solid punter. He was graded a B. And then the rest of the group, Keyshawn Nixon, B- for kick return. Jaden Reed graded a D for punt return just because he didn't return punts. Matt Orzek graded out a C. Obviously, you included Brandon Arvison for when he played. He graded out an F. Where can we start with the special teams? I guess we can start with the bright spots, right? The kicker situation is set. You got to get McManus back, and Whelan is a good punter. So at least with that foundation too, McManus proved even at 33 years old, it doesn't matter if it's still really, really cold outside, indoors, game on the line, 55-yarder. He's the vet that can deliver for this Packers special teams.
First of all, Braden Arbison was probably the easiest grade. That was a very quick and swift F. But what Brandon McManus did week 7 on, I mean, just think about it. His first 2 games are walk-off game-winning field goals. He didn't have a training camp. Obviously he worked out on his own, but he's just stepping into October and boom, win. Late in the season, he hit 3 50-plus yard field goals in November or later inside Lambeau Field, including a 55-yarder against the Saints and a 55-yarder against the Bears that should have been the game-winning kick. Should have been his 3rd game-winning kick if the Packers defense knew how to line up right on the Bears' next drive.
Yeah.
55 yards in January in Lambeau Field, that is a hellacious kick. I mean, he has leg. He obviously missed 2. One was a 46-yarder in Detroit through a driving rainstorm. Okay, that happens. The worst miss of the year was in the playoffs, the 38-yard field goal against the Eagles. That really ultimately didn't really have much impact on a 22-10 game. But, kind of for a team that remembers Anders Carlson, 41 yards, San Francisco, not great to see a playoff miss. With that said, during the regular season, Brandon McManus, 21 of 20, one of only 2 kickers in the league to have at least 20 field goal attempts and no more than 1 miss. The other, Nick Folk of the Titans. Mm-hmm. That's not a lot of company that he's keeping there. At the end of the day, I had to give him an A-. Not if he makes the playoff field goal, he might have been a solid A. Like, that's how close he was to that. I had to give him an A-. Daniel Whelan's got a leg, man. And we can – the eyeball test, we know that, but when you put a stopwatch to it, average over 4.5 seconds of hang time per punt. He'd have some wonky type of weeks. Like, I still don't know what was happening week 5 in Los Angeles indoors.
Indoors, yeah.
I'll never understand that. I mean, it just goes to show for punters, no matter how strong the leg is, if you miss the spot off your foot, you're not hitting the ball well. But as a whole, I thought he was even better than 2023. He was very good in 2023. Back-to-back years now, he has posted the second highest gross average in Packers history, 46.2 identical. That is only behind Corey Bojorquez in 2021. Corey Bojorquez proven to be one of the best punters in the league. The difference between those two, Daniel Whelan does not mishandle snaps. His hands are very sound and reliable. Matt Orzak had an up and down year as a snapper. I think it was close to 10 off-target snaps between extra points, field goals, and punts. The one that didn't count, I don't know if you remember this, Dominique, but back in the end zone week 5 against the Rams, where he almost snapped the ball over Daniel Whelan's head, a circus highlight reel catch for Daniel Whelan. That actually didn't count. I forgot that was a delay of game penalty before that play. They had to redo it, and then Daniel Whelan had like a 37-yard punt. I still don't know what was going on in Los Angeles, but as a whole, he's a good punter. He's a solid B. Keyshawn Nixon, I know he says that he doesn't want to return kickoffs anymore. I just don't see that happening. They get the ball at the 30 every single time because they don't kick to him. There is new rules in the league that were designed to inspire more kickoffs, and I swear NFL teams missed that memo when kicking to Keyshawn Nixon. Of his first 21 kickoffs, 20 were touchbacks. It wasn't until week 6 when the weather started to turn that he even got a chance at it. And ultimately, that's an element that they're not there's a reason Matt LaFleur was surprised that Keyshawn Nixon said that. That's not going to happen. What does need to happen is another punt returner, a different punt return. For one, and let's be nice before we're critical. Jaden Reed's the best receiver on your roster. You don't want he's critical. He's foundational to the offense from the slot. You don't want him taking hits on punt return anyway. But 2, he doesn't take hits on punt return because he fair catches it all the time. 64 times he dropped back for the field of punt. 31 he fair caught. Several times had at least 5 yards of space around him. I don't know if he was told going off the sideline, just catch the punt or not. Sometimes he had 2 muffs too. So it's not, he had against the Texans, he had that over the shoulder catch at the 1 yard line that carried him into the end zone. He only returned it 5 yards to the 4. So there were some serious breakdowns as a punt returner. He's your best receiver on the roster. If he's struggling with punt return, find somebody else.
Yeah. Last point with the special teams, and your analysis summed it up. Did they win a couple of games? Yes, because of McManus, his 2 kicks. Whelan did some really good things. He flipped the field. I can't remember the game, but where just kicked that ball. It was at Lambeau, straight up in the air, went through the guy's hands. Packers recovered it, scored before halftime.
That was Minnesota week 4.
Minnesota week 4, right? It
also happened against the Dolphins, though. Their first punt of the game early in the first quarter on that Thanksgiving night.
Yes. So he made some impact there, right? So that's kind of like their bright spots. But on the flip side, like you mentioned, this special teams unit has probably caused just as many losses as any other position, offense or defense, for these Packers. And so you can't keep costing games on special teams. And again, your analysis summed it up best.
How about this? The last 3 times that the Packers went to the playoffs, their season-ending loss, the highlight, or I guess the low light of those games, all 3 times were special teams blunders. I'm talking the 2021 NFC Divisional Round game at Lambeau Field against the 49ers, the block punt. I'm talking the Anders Carlson missed field goal in the 4th quarter with a 4-point lead, would have made it a touchdown lead, 2023 NFC Divisional Round against San Francisco. And I'm talking the Keyshawn Nixon fumble that, I get it, Oren Burks was fine, should have been a penalty. It wasn't. You still got to you got to keep the ball. You got, no matter what, like you get decapitated, you still have the ball. Like that's the way it goes. when you have the ball in your hand. When you have the ball in your hand, you're the franchise. You have the franchise in the hand. You got to keep the ball. So the last 3 times they've lost they've ended their season on the wings of special teams errors. That's a trend you don't want to see if you're the Packers. You got to stop if you're the Packers. But it's not just that. It's the Edrin Cooper offsides in Minnesota that gave a retry on a missed field goal and what became a 2-point loss. Mm-hmm. It's trying to build the kicking position through a rookie again after just seeing it didn't happen with Anders Carlson. And Braden Arvison misses 2 kicks from inside 50 week 4 and what became a 2-point loss to the Vikings. Over and over again.
The Bears trick play.
Yeah.
So there's just so many things. I remember that Bears trick play with the punt. I mean, they're just
the punt return. Yeah,
the punt return.
On a day where Matt LaFleur said it, like the entire plan that day was to get an early lead, shut down your starters, rest them, get them to play a little bit, get the blood flowing, win the game, get some momentum, and then get ready for the playoffs. Well, that punt return 7-0.
Yeah,
because you don't know what you don't know which side of the field you're punting the ball. That can't happen.
Yeah. They got a lot of work to do in some areas, no question about it. And there was a lot there. And I guess we told the final grades. I even made some notes. Well, it was 59 players. 3 players received A's. Jacobs, McKinney, and McManus. There were
only one solid A, though. Only one solid A. There was 2 A-minuses.
That's true. McKinney was the solid A. And there were 12 different guys that were in the B category, 24 in the C, 9 Ds, 2 Fs, 9 incompletions, which included, Preston Smith and some of those injured guys. And the only difference, Nixon and Reed were graded twice. And they were in the, the B and D category. But there was a lot there. And I enjoyed checking it out, Ryan. Thank you.
I'm glad you read that off. I hadn't done that myself yet. I was curious because honestly, this is the first I'm hearing it. So that tells me that the floor of this roster is very high. Mm-hmm. That they need more at the top, right? They don't have a lot of guys below C. That's average. That's not a bad grade. There's not a lot of D's and F's here. One of the F's is gone, Braden Arvison. But they need more than 3 A's, right? They need more at the top. And I think that speaks to how I've already thought of this offseason already, is that you got a young team. There's some internal development that needs to happen. But go get some of those A-listers. You need more.
Yep. And that was the name of the game. Like you said, that's why they won 11 games and lost in the first round of the playoffs. They pretty much, the numbers kind of say they were about a C team, right? They were strong in really good areas. And then there were areas where they struggled and made mistakes. And that's the name of the game. So we'll see what happens next year with this group. But Ryan, well done. I don't compliment you enough, right? That's what you always say. So
I agree with that, Dom. You don't compliment me near enough. I'm starved for your affection and your attention, so I appreciate that, sir.
Well, you got it. You gave me 2 pages of notes to run through, and it was good to kind of, like I said, dive deep into all of this. And I guess we got to do the plugs. If you're not subscribed, you have to be subscribing. This information on Packers News, on Journal Sentinel, like we're going to have this podcast up. There's so much that comes from these grades and analysis throughout even the offseason that, hey, this is the place to be. And we're going to get ready for the combine and much more. So,
yeah, I was going to say, not to mention next week, the grades, you can still go check those out. But just because the grade series is done doesn't mean that we're done. Dominique and Spoon going to be at the combine next week, wall-to-wall coverage. So it never stops, Dominique. Now, it pauses for me now. I want your little R&R. I need that. I'll just wave as you guys fill Packers News with your great content. But I'll of course read that myself. But it never stops. The NFL offseason is always going. So yeah, go check that out.
Yeah. So looking forward to the next few months with the draft. I'm not speaking too soon on the draft, free agency. So it's going to be very interesting to see because we're about to hit that point in the offseason where you start to get a better sense of how this roster might look and what places and what holes are going to be filled. So, again, get ready for that. And I guess it's time for me to get off my couch and start working again while you sit on your couch and rest.
Oh, yeah. You have fun with that.
Right. So thank you very much, my friend. And we thank you all for checking out this Green 19 podcast where we broke down grades and analysis from the Packers 2024 season. For Ryan Wood, I'm Dominique Yates. Thank you for checking it out.